guys, welcome to part 3 and the final part for our entire course, which is the Photoshop for Beginners, CS4 and above course, and we teach the essentials here. We've covered a lot in our past few classes. Now we're going to look into one of the last and most important features of Photoshop, which is layers. Manipulating image layers. In our previous classes, we talked about layer blending modes, and using layers and how they worked. And we're going to look a little more into working with layers. So let's just use this image, for example, which was used, I believe, in our last class, and create a few different copies. Let's create a few shapes as well. So you can't see it at the moment because it's below the previous layers. So notice. And it's got a soft light filter, and I just made that normal. So notice that every layer that we place on top of each other affects the layer right below it. That's the one feature of Photoshop. That's the whole point of layers. And for example, this layer is actually a vector, and you can distort it by going into Edit, Retransform, playing around with it, like rotating it, reducing the size, and so on. You can also go to Edit, Transform, and pick Skew, Distort, Perspective, or Warp, any of these options to play around with the image or the layer. You can do that even with a pixelated image, even with a regular photograph. Go to Free Transform or Transform, play around with the image. You also know what content aware scale does, so you can do that as well. You can even fill a layer. So if we create a new layer, you can go into Edit and pick Fill, and then choose whether you want to fill a foreground color, a background color, any color you like. Foreground color refers to the first square of color at the top of the color picker, and background color refers to the second square. So my foreground color is blue, my background color is white. Or if you have a particular color, and then it's going to ask, Photoshop asks you what color you would like to fill your layer with. Let's pick red. Whether you want the opacity of the color to be 100% and what blending mode would you like for that layer. I'm going to pick soft light and then hit OK. So the fill was applied as a soft light. The overall layer is still at normal, but the effect of that fill was applied with a soft light effect. So, for example, I went into Edit, and if I pick Fill, let's use color, but let's choose hue. So if we choose color, make that red, picked OK. For example, if you wanted to add a fill to a layer, you could go into Edit, go into Fill, or make sure that the right layer that you want to fill in is selected. Hit Fill. Remove Preserve Transparency because the layer is completely transparent at the moment. You can use a foreground color or background color of your choice, or a pattern, or you can even use History to fill in a particular area. Use black or gray or white. I'm going to choose color. Pick red. The mode is currently at hue. Hit OK. And this is what happens. So even though the mode is in hue, for example, if this was my image, and if I wanted to fill this image, so if I picked hue, notice that the entire area gets filled with the color in that particular blending mode. It's not noticeable in this layer because this layer was completely transparent, so it got applied as a solid color, even though it has a blending mode of hue. Whereas if you applied it to an image, it applies that blending mode on top of it, sort of like a layer. So fill is another way to add an invisible or a quick fix to your image or to your image layer. You can also stroke the image. So first off, make sure that the area you want to stroke is selected. For example, if you want to give a border to your entire image, hit Ctrl A, the entire image layer is selected. Go to Stroke, and select how many pixels you want as a stroke around the image. So we're going to pick 10 pixels. I want a white border. You can choose whether you want it inside, outside, or in the center. Inside means that it will stroke on the inside of the image. Outside means that it will stroke on the outside of your image. And center is similar to outside in that sense, but it strokes, it averages it out and strokes somewhere in the middle of the image. It's technically on the outside. You can even choose a blending mode like the fill feature in the edit menu, or you can leave it as normal. You can even preserve transparency. We'll leave transparency unchecked, hit OK, and it got stroked. Those 10 pixels were stroked on the inside of the image. Now, let me just show you what I mean when it says it strokes on the outside of the image. Let's scale this down just a little bit. Notice that there is an image behind this. The original image is behind this. If I wanted to edit and hit stroke and pick outside, it would stroke on the outside of the image, not on the inside. Again, if I duplicated this and let's remove this, and if I stroked on the outside, you will not see the stroke because it got stroked on the outside. If I reduce the size, you still won't see it because it got cut off in the image. So make sure that when you're stroking a border that the selection is within your document. So this is stroke on the inside. And notice how it's stroked on the inside. If I shift again, and now edit, stroke, the center. So notice how it's stroked at the center of the selection, at the center of the line. Now, and it stroked this twice, by the way. We hit stroke on the outside, and it's stroked on the outside of the selection. So that's another way to work with your layers in Photoshop. There's a lot of different ways to work with images and image layers in Photoshop. Besides transforming, fill, stroke, you can also add image adjustments. We talked about that. Add layer masks, a new fill layer, whether you want one with gradient or pattern directly, and what your layer properties are. You can choose what to name your layer and what color it is or what color it is represented by. It doesn't fill the area with that color, but it is represented by that color. If you had a lot of layers, that was represented by that particular color. So that's it. Now mastering the layers panel. This is our layers panel, and just a quick breakdown. This is your blending mode area, so you can choose various effects in Photoshop for the layer to blend. These are your opacity and fill sliders. These are your lock options. So what this does is, for example, let me duplicate this. And let's resize this so that we can see what happens. Now, this image has got transparent pixels around it, of course. If I choose to lock, if I choose the first option, if I choose to move this around, it would move around, but supposing I select this transparent area, it could not move the selection because the selected area is empty. But at the same time, what this does is it locks transparent pixels within your image. So if I say deleted this part, and then if I try to move, if I move the image, the entire thing will move. If I try to move this part in the image, notice that only this, I'll zoom in again. I've selected transparent areas as well as the non-transparent areas, and if I move, only the solid area gets moved. The transparent bit does not move. So this basically locks down on transparent pixels. It's not really used that much, to be honest. unless you have a lot of transparent pixels. For example, if you have a gradient and you want to lock that while you move the solid part of the gradient, you could use this option. Now the second option, the brush one, locks image pixels. So what that does is you can't edit the image pixels. Or this one, you couldn't edit transparent pixels. Let's just deselect this. Anything I did here would not be recorded on a transparent image. Whereas if I go to the second one, the brush one, nothing can be recorded on the image entirely. You can reduce the size and you can transform it, but you can't use any of the Photoshop tools on the image. Sort of like a non-editing mode, because it's locked all of the image pixels, so you can't change any of the pixels. Third option doesn't allow you to move the image. So notice that could not complete request because the layer is locked. You can edit the image, you can play around, use a brush on it, use the eraser, use the healing brush tool, whatever you like, but you can't move the image. And finally, the last option just locks everything in the image, the transparent pixels, the image pixels, and movement. So you can't do anything to the image. And that's the lock features within the layer panel for you. Now, the next bit about layers is the little settings icon on the side, and from there you can add a new layer, duplicate layers, and access a lot of layer properties like convert to smart objects and so on. You can also right click a layer and convert to smart object or duplicate a layer. Hold on a second, let's bring that down so you can see all the options. You can bring up layer properties, create a clipping mask, select similar layers, or flatten the image, and so on. You can also do that from the settings icon on the right side of the layers panel. There are lots of other options available as well, such as animation options, panel options, and this is purely for aesthetic reasons. You can choose your thumbnail size. This is your thumbnail and you can choose the size of it. You can even choose none, and if you choose none, the color of the layer, remember when we double clicked and it showed us the name of the layer and what color it was represented by? So those colors would show up as the basic indicator for the layer. You can also choose to show layer bounds or the entire document. You can just show where the layer is bound by or the entire document that you are working on. You can also choose to show default mask on fill layers or expand new effects, and add copy to copy layers and groups. So the word copy would be added to the name of the layer and groups. You can also add an effect from here. Just click and all of your blending layer styles are as well as blending options. Then you also have add a layer mask, add an adjustment layer. If you don't have the adjustment panel, you can add an adjustment layer from here. You can add or create a new group from the folder here. You can also create a new layer or delete a layer. And that's the layers panel. Easy as pie. Now our next topic is understanding the layer style window. And this is one of the final bits about layers and one of the most interesting and varied, because it's sort of like additional effects for your layers. So let me just delete this one. Let's actually add something interesting to this, something very abstract. For example, let's add her to the image. I just select the entire person. There we go. Subtract certain parts. Just hit Command C, hit Command V. So that she's pretty small, or her hand didn't get selected. So just select that part of her. Part. So it's a pretty random image. Let's zoom in and see what it does. Now if you double click, you bring up the layer style window automatically, but you can also go to the settings and pick blending options, and it brings up the layer style. You can also go into your effects and pick a layer style automatically from the menu, or go into blending options again, and there it is. Or you can even go into layer in the menu, go to layer style, pick blending options, or pick any of the options that you'd like over here. So there are a lot of different ways to access the layer style window. Now, your current style is none, but you can also add styles like these, the default styles provided by Photoshop. So this applies on itself on top of the image. Example. And then you have blending options, where you can apply a drop shadow to the image and play around with the different sliders like opacity. Right now this is the general overall of blending options for the image, but if you click on each of the blending options, you'll be able to see specific sliders for each one. How much of the distance would you like for the shadow? What is the spread like? The size? Whether there's inner shadow for this image. You can even uncheck, so add an inner shadow instead, so that she looks like she's cut out of the apple. So it's tons of fun like that. You can choose outer glow, which adds in sort of like a halo around the image, or an inner glow. So these two options are basically the opposite of the drop shadow and the inner shadow, wherein they add a glow instead of a shadow. Then you also have bevel and emboss, which creates a 3D effect on your image. You also have contour and texture, so you can add a specific contour to your image to create a more rougher effect. Even add a texture if you'd like of a particular pattern. And the scale of it, lesser, more, and so on. You can add satin, which is a kind of texture effect as well. Color overlay, so if you wanted to fill something, this is a good way to do it. And you can even pick the blend mode and the opacity. That's another way to fill up color in an image, especially one with irregular borders. And if you are not too bothered about selecting the entire image, so this is another way to fill up an image. You can also do a gradient overlay, and this does an automatic gradient overlay for you. And pick your gradient, double click to pick your gradient, add as many gradients as you'd like, and play around with it. As well as the style of the gradient, as well as the scale of the gradient, and the angle. So you don't have to manually apply it. Then you can even choose a pattern for the layer that you're adding the effect to, or a stroke. So you don't have to go into File, you don't have to select the image, then go into File, Edit, and then hit Fill. That's really not necessary, as there's an effect like that in Photoshop. Inside, even choose the blend mode. So it's tons of fun, the blending options. And in layer styles, these are the default blending options, but you can also add a new style and include the layer effects and include the layer blending options and create new styles for the layer. So for example, if we had, let's say this one, we added a drop shadow to this, added texture to this, added a pattern to this, you can save that as a new style, hit OK, and it's saved over here as your new style. If you ever want to delete it, just right click, hit delete style, and it's gone. That's all you really need to know about layer styles. They're tons of fun. Go crazy, experiment. I did. So yeah, I'm just gonna delete that. And finally, our last topic for today's class is creating layer groups and comps. So now that you know all about the layers panel, You're probably a master at it, and you know how to use layer styles and layer blending options. It's important to know how to organize your layers, and you might be creating different groups like groups 1, 2, 3 and adding images within each group. So let's just create multiple versions, or let's say we add a lot of different layers to these groups. You could organize your files like this, but this can get very tedious because you'd have to toggle them open and close. You'd have to expand each folder to view what you're doing. So you could also save an image as a snapshot. Well, it's not exactly a snapshot. Photoshop calls them layer comps, and instead of saving it as a group with a hierarchy of further folders within your groups, you could save a layer comp. And what this does is it creates a snapshot, quite simply. And we did snapshots, and a snapshot saves the current state of what you're doing. And a layer comp saves all the layers that are currently visible or active or selected by you. So to create a layer comp, now let's say we have 3 layers. Let's fill this one with blue. And let's fill the next one with a darker blue. So all of these layers are active. So to create a layer comp, you have to go into your window. Make sure that your layer comps panel is open. Layers is open, but we don't have layer comps. So there's our layer comps panel. I'm going to minimize the layers panel, and I'm going to move it down here. Oh, come on. Let's toggle it, move it down here, so that we can see what a layer comp does. Now, first off, make sure your layers are all visible, all the layers that you want to put into a layer comp. Make sure your window layer comps is active as well. And just pick a new layer, and this creates a new layer comp. Quite simple. That's pretty easy. You can choose a name, apply, and then you can create a new layer comp based on layers whose visibility is available to you. So that means all of the layers that have eyes on them or are active visibly will be saved to the layer comp, or the position. So all of the layers' position and the appearance, so the layer style. So just hit OK. We have layer comp 1. Now, for example, if I remove these 3 and I create a new layer comp, just visibility, just hit OK. Now watch. In the first layer comp, all layers were selected. In the second one, only these were selected. So this is really useful if you have a lot of different layers, but if you can't be bothered with groups, because groups are pretty hierarchical in nature and quite linear in workflow. For example, supposing you've been working on layer after layer after layer and then realize, oh goodness, I haven't saved anything, but you know how the page or the design looks like if you enable and disable certain layers. You can use layer comps to save certain states of the image or of the document that you're working on. So this is useful as well for web pages. For example, let's create another layer comp. For example, if this was my home page, let's just delete these. Let's start over. If this was my home page, let's put this down. Let's put this in the middle. You can create a new layer comp, pick position, appearance, layer style as well. Apply to all the layers with visibility chosen. Hit OK, and that's your first layer comp. You can even double click on it later and rename it, no problem. Create a new layer comp. First off, make sure that the layers you want to save are visible. So I want this blue layer to be saved. Pick layer comp. Create a new layer comp. Name it whatever you like. Add a comment if you'd like. Hit OK, and your new layer comp is there. So this is our first. This is our second. And if you want to export any of these images or any of these layer comps to your documents or wherever you'd like, go to File, hit Scripts, and then go into Layer Comps to Files. Basically, it will save all of your layer comps currently, and you can actually choose to save just that layer comp, so the selected layer comp, this one, or you can choose to save all layer comps to your desktop. Right now it's saving to my desktop in Photoshop stock. You can choose another document as well by going into Browse and choosing a destination folder. And you can even, and it saves as a PSD, but you can also choose to save as a bitmap, a JPEG file, a PDF, a Targa file, a TIFF file, PNG 8-bit or PNG 24-bit. If I hit run, let's just wait for that to layer comps to file successful. Go to File, hit Open. If I go down, Apple's Layer Comp 1, notice the preview. It saved one of my layer comps, the first layer comp, which displayed apples, as the first PSD file, and it saved that layer comp 2 as the second PSD file. So this is great if you have, say, have a web page and you have various stages in your web page to show off to a client. You can use layer comps to not just organize your files but also export various versions of that same web page to a client. And that's it for part 3. So this is your assignment. Feel free to do it if you'd like. It's a pretty fun one where you create a mixed media style design in Photoshop using layers, using layer masks, using various blending tools and the selection tools as well. It introduces you to a few new techniques and helps your creative juices flow, and hopefully it inspires you to create your own designs in Photoshop, your own abstract artworks. Thank you for watching, and I hope this first course was helpful in getting you started in Photoshop. Have a great day!